Good morning, I'm Roger Davis, the President of the New South Wales Sports High School Association, and I'm going to be the MC for today's conference. Thank you for joining us today. I believe that we have close to 190 people, which is an absolutely fantastic result. I'm sure that you'll find the day beneficial. Our guest speakers are at the top of their field, and I know that you'll gain a lot from everything that you hear today. I want to thank Michael McKnight from ACPE, who has organised and hosted the event. It's a pity we can't be there in person, but COVID is what it is, and we will make do with the best that we can. I'm going to hand over straight away to Debbie LaRue. Debbie is the CEO of ACPE, and I'll get her to welcome you all here and officially open today's seminar, which is leadership in the holistic development of the high-performing student athlete. So thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Roger. Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful weekend and that you're all well and healthy under the current circumstances. I'd like to, as Roger has indicated, welcome you all to this exciting initiative. ACPE is very excited about this partnership. This relationship is central to the mission and values of the college, which speaks to nurturing relationships within the community. ACPE, if you don't know yet, has a legacy of more than a century of education in sport. And we recognize the transformational power of both sport and education in the lives of our students and communities. So this relationship and this partnership with the New South Wales Sports High Schools Association leverages these considerable synergies between our organizations so that we can drive value to both organizations and the schools and the wider community. I think particularly at a time like this, it's more important than ever for organizations like ours to work together and take hands to make a positive difference, particularly in our efforts as we try to promote health and well-being as a holistic approach to developing resilience in young people. So I am not going to waffle on too much longer, but we are delighted to be part of this, and I have no doubt that this seminar will drive value for you and your students.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Yes, the Sports High Schools Association is certainly looking forward to the partnership with ACPE. I'm sure it will be long and fruitful and beneficial for everybody involved. The New South Wales Sports High School Association also has had a long association with the Office of Sport, and I'm very happy to introduce to you Karen Jones, who is the CEO from the New South Wales Office of Sport, to officially kick the day off. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, hi everybody. My name's Karen Jones and I'm the Chief Executive at the Office of Sport. And first of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we all gather today. I know that everybody is dialing in from either a workplace or from home. So let's all acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which today's gathering takes place. And myself personally, I would like to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders, past, present and emerging. I've been given the honour of opening today's proceedings on behalf of the Office of Sport and welcome you all. I was really looking forward to welcome you all, particularly the sporting high school coaches, to Sydney Olympic Park for your development day. But unfortunately, this meeting can't be in person at the moment, and I'm sure we all look forward to a time when, again, we can meet face to face and hopefully be meeting in what they call the new normal. When Roger actually approached me to open today's event, he highlighted my busy schedule as being a possible barrier, but I really wanted to prioritise this in my schedule to reinforce the ongoing partnership between the Office of Sport and Sport High Schools Network. I see this partnership as incredibly important in developing the next cohort of sporting champions who will represent New South Wales and Australia in the years ahead, just like the many alumni that we will see over the coming months at both the Tokyo Olympics and also the Paralympic Games. The collaboration between the Office of Sport and the Sport High Schools has been great and it will continue to grow. The partnership has been driven by Dr. Anita Weisensteiner, who's on the call today. Anita is our Pathways Advisor at the Office of Sport. I know she's really looking forward to speaking to you today about your critical role as coaches to safely support athletes along the F10 pathway. The office looks forward to working with you to implement the principles of the F10 New South Wales and putting it into effective practice. We'll also look forward to supporting your education and share information, and also to implement our Future Champion strategy. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the tremendous work that has been undertaken to review the talent programs across Sport High Schools network. This is a significant undertaking by the leadership team headed by Roger Davis and Brad McCarroll, who again are also on the call, to capture the views from all 7 schools, from coaches, parents, students and school leaders. I am convinced that using a robust evidence base to improve your programs is a sound and wise investment to inform the ongoing review and refinement of your programs and lead to further great achievements. Sport is central to our communities, whether it is the work being undertaken by your highly talented young athletes or at local weekend sport. Sport-based programs have been shown to improve the learning performance of children and young people, encouraging school attendance and a desire to succeed academically. The benefits of participating in any sport and active recreation are clear and undisputed. There's improved health and well-being, there's economic gain, there's widespread social benefits, and of course, stronger communities. Through this understanding, I am sure that the partnership between the Office of Sport and Sporting High Schools will continue long into the future. So thank you everybody for inviting me to open today, and I hope your development day is informative and enlightening. Please enjoy. Thanks, Roger.
Great, thank you very much, Karen. And thanks for your ongoing support and for those kind words. Much appreciated. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Anita Weisensteiner. I won't go through her bio. Her bio is included in the registration and the links here today, and it will take me probably 15 minutes to read through it. It is that extensive. But thank you, Anita, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Roger. Before I go in the presentation, I just wanted to commend you and Brad for the incredible work that you have done. I know we've had a wonderful collaboration for many years, but you know, the review that you've done recently, but your leadership is second to none. So I just wanted to commend you on that, and also to commend all of you coaches out there, because it's very evident the wonderful work that you are doing with your athletes. So it's absolutely fantastic to see. So Roger and Brad have asked me to touch a bit on F10 New South Wales and to put up, I guess, some tips for your consideration as coaches to really help with the holistic development of your emerging athletes. So before I start, can you guys hear me okay? All good? Excellent. Thanks, Mick. Thanks for the thumbs up. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so the F10 framework, hopefully a lot of you are familiar with the F10 framework that we put together at the Australian Institute of Sport. Yeah, it was around 2011, 2012. And there was a critical need to put a practical framework together to support the work we were doing with national sporting organisations at that time. You know, a whole of sport framework that was based on best practice and gave guidance to everyone supporting participants and athletes. So just to break it down, I guess the F levels, F1 to F3, is all about a best practice approach and an evidence-based approach to developing the foundations of sport that leads into lifelong engagement in sport and physical activity, but also provides those critical foundations that is the platform for future high performance success. So within this, it speaks to having a full repertoire of fundamental movement skills and the competencies of those for children, but also about physical literacy and development of physical literacy and maintenance of physical literacy through the lifespan. At the T levels, which stands for talent, are 4 specific levels, and we're really going to unpack that today in this session. This is all about having an effective talent pipeline. So those foundational gifted athletes that want to go into the high performance levels, they have to go through this pre-elite sort of phases. And this is about giving them inclusive talent ID opportunities at the T1, about confirming their talent potential and whether they're ready for the step up into pre-elite development. T3 is all about holistic integrated pre-elite development, and T4 is a critical point where they have a breakthrough event, and it's about readying them in a holistic way for that transition from a junior elite level up into the senior elite levels. And at the pinnacle of F10 are our elite and mastery levels. So this is really about, again, a holistic and integrated approach to supporting our very finest athletes in Australia, and to be able to support them in having success at the highest levels perennially over multiple high performance cycles. Also, critically, it's important to draw on these athletes, to engage with them, to learn from their experiences, and that then is utilised to inform the underpinning talent strategies and high performance strategies as well. So the F10 framework really provides a systems approach to sport development and participant development. It's a way to visualize, the steps that are involved, and also it helps to visualize the opportunities at each level as well. It's complementary in its coverage because it recognises the importance of having an active lifestyle along with recreational sport and high performance sport. It's very holistic in its philosophy, as I touched on earlier, and it really is about promoting physical literacy for the participant through life, all the way up to a senior level, but also the importance of physical literacy for a high performance athlete. While it does look linear, it's not in terms of its concept and application. So what it's all about is, because we know that, participants and athletes have a variance of trajectory, in their journey in sport and their development. And it would be nearly impossible to cover all that, in a framework. But what F10 provides is, wherever that participant is at that time or athlete, it's about giving them the right support at the right time. And that's where F10 really affords great flexibility and a right match of support, for the participant athlete. It's deliberately not based on chronological age, because again, we know from the research we've done and the research globally, there is great variance in ages. So it makes it too restricted to put ages on there. But it's really about drawing on global best practice, our experiential learning as well, and using that to get the right result at that level. So it's about drawing contemporary best practice and giving the best chance to the participant and athlete. And most importantly too, F10 is inclusive in coverage. Not only does it support the journey of an athlete, an able-bodied athlete, but it also supports of a Paralympic athlete as well. More recently, and it's been wonderful to work in the New South Wales Office of Sport, we've taken the liberty to put together an F10 New South Wales, which you can see on our screen here, and that you can access from our Pathways and Development web pages that are now live in the Office of Sport website. But you can see here we've got a bit more commentary to the levels. We've got a bit more of a complement of the recreational sport offerings that participants can do at a young age, an adult and a senior. But also we wonderfully recognise our wonderful ambassadors that are representing actually at the Paralympics and Olympics. So we've got Madison Di Rosario there, our wonderful Paralympic wheelchair racer, and Jessica Fox. So with F10, and I touched on it before, it really is a systems approach. We understand with the athlete in the middle, they can't do it all on their own. They require the right fit of environmental support. So whether it be parents, schools, coaches, peers, the right fit of daily training environment, practitioners and so forth, they need that environmental support that needs to be coordinated, integrated and best practice to really nurture their holistic profile. And then importantly, surrounding that, enveloping both, is the system level support. And this is the coordination, the leadership shown through national sporting organisations, but also at the government levels as well, about policy and funding, about having a good evidence base, and about great facilities. So it all works together, and F10 really helps to articulate this, and it helps to empower and integrate and coordinate all of these for the betterment of the participant and athlete at the centre. Now, today we're going to touch on specifically how the F10 New South Wales best practice relates to you as a coach. Now, you coaches are critical to the success of the implementation of F10 New South Wales. And I consider that the F10 New South Wales framework and its guiding principles are really important for you as a coach, you know, to understand where your participant or athlete is on their developmental journey. So what level are they at and what nurturing do they require, but also importantly, understanding their motivation and aspiration, which you know actually informs greatly your delivery and your approach with that individual participant and athlete. It also informs your role and your approach. So how you're going to support that participant or athlete. So your focus, how you're going to deliver it, and who's going to support you in doing that. And also importantly, it supports the linkage and the collaboration of yourself with sporting organisations, with practitioners, to all work together to support you in supporting the athlete. And just to say, we're just about to launch our Future Champions Action Plan. It's our first action plan from the strategy. And in that, we've been working away, building some resources, and very pleased to say that very soon we'll be able to share with you some comprehensive resources that really unpack that system approach to F10 New South Wales. So, and we will also have our resources for coaches and instructors. So based on F10 and best practice, but also informed by the great guidance like Mick, who will be presenting to you a little bit later. We wanted to make sure that these considerations that we offer, you know, are guided by best practice, but also feasible and practical for you as a coach. But today, what I'm going to focus on is the talent levels. And so we're going to unpack some of those recommendations that I've actually got in these resources that we'll be able to share with you very soon. In the resource, we really unpack the talent levels. And what I've got here is a schematic of the talent pipeline. And as I touched on before, the T levels are not really a chronology or a competition ages or competition levels. It's really about a best practice approach to really ensure we've got strong talent pipelines in our system. So at the start, it's about inclusive talent ID and doing it in a valid and reliable way. But also importantly, those initial predictions of talent are verified through holistic approaches. It's really important, the combination of talent ID and follow-up talent verification within practice, within competition, to really inform effectively your talent selection decisions. Today, in the rest of my presentation, I'm going to really focus on talent development. That does happen in T2, but mostly happens in the T3 level. And this is where once you've identified and confirmed a talent, you pop them in this wonderful environment, such as the sport high schools programs, to really nurture the athlete's holistic development. And then T4, how you can ready that pre-elite athlete and support them in their next step up and their progression into the senior elite levels. Now, I note down the bottom here that while we've got, it looks like it's a linear process and we've got 4 levels, that in reality, pre-elite athletes might go through this process many times. They might get up to a certain level at an age group and then go back down, you know, to go up to the next level, or they might drop out, or they might come back in as a talent transfer athlete. So while this looks linear, it affords that flexibility and the variability of trajectory of our pre-elite athletes. So I've got some questions for you guys as coaches, and I know you guys will be all over it. And I'm just using Danny Samuels, a wonderful alumni from Westfields High School, as backdrop. So some questions I'll put to you is, do you understand the required athlete profile underpinning elite performance? Do you understand in a very holistic and integrated way? Following on that, do you have a dedicated and individualised development and transitional plan specific to each of your athletes? And are you sure that everyone is on the same page with that? What can you do to nurture and support and empower your pre-elite athlete profile? And then finally, how do you know if you and the athlete are on track, and what informs your decision making? So there's 4 key questions that I want you to consider, but we're going to now touch on some suggestions and tips for each of those. So we now know from extensive research over the last few decades, my own PhD, the work I've been doing, with NSOs and SSOs in New South Wales, we know that what it takes to win requires a holistic and integrated athlete profile with all these dimensions. We know it takes to have a favourable developmental background, good fundamental movement skills, good physical literacy, sports sampling before specialisation, lots of investment in free play, early competition progression, and lots of competition exposure. We also know that you need to have the right fit of physicality. This is not just your anthropometrics, your height, your weight, but it's also about your neuromuscular robustness. So it's about stability and strength and posture, and about recoverability and coordination control. It's also about having the right fit of engine as well. But also importantly, it's not just the physical and the foundational experiences. It's also importantly the sport-specific skills. So having the right fit and synchrony of perceptual skills, so reading an opponent with decision-making skills, and then technical skills. So the marrying up of perceptual, decision-making, cognitive skills, and technical skill execution. At the elite level, this has to be at the automatic level, where it's at the level of a subconscious, conscious thought. And you need to be able to do this time and time again in different scenarios, under fatigue, under pressure. You need to be able to do this and repeat it, and to be able to adapt it as well. Also importantly, you have to be a great ambassador. You have to live great NSO and Olympic values. You need to be super organised, self-managed. You need to have good sport-life balance, particularly if you're a student athlete. You need to be able to deal with multiple stressors, and you need to have phenomenal knowledge that you put into practice, what it takes to be an athlete. And then I think the key thing for me that I've found from all my research over the many years, and I'm sure that Steve will speak to later, is having the right psychological characteristics and skills. Again, very multidimensional. We've found that this is critical to high performance, and indeed actually getting to that point as well. So as you can see, really what it takes is a multidimensional and integrated athlete profile. Now, drawing on the work I did with Cricket Australia for my PhD, I got to talk to the greats, Justin Langer, Greg Chappell, to name a few. I put a model together and I tested that model empirically with over 111, 112 batsmen across age. And this is the model that I came up with. This is all evidence-based. And again, you can see to reach an expert level of batting in cricket internationally requires all these dimensions. And you can see the green arrows. So while each dimension is important, sub-dimension, there's interactions and relatedness between the different dimensions. All work together to get that expert level of performance. And then more recently, I've had the great pleasure to supervise one of my PhD students, Dr. Lauren Burns now. She's just gotten her PhD. You remember her from Sydney when she won gold. But again, her research has shown from interviewing 14 of our finest athletes in Australian history in sport that, again, it's multidimensional. The sweet spot to hit performance really is a blend of performance, relationships, the psychology of the athlete, and also importantly, balance their lifestyle. So why is having an understanding of the multidimensional athlete profile important? Well, it's critically important. It informs what should be happening at the foundational levels to inform strategy and your delivery as a coach. But also, this profile informs your talent selection strategies, your talent development strategies, how you're going to negotiate and support transition of that athlete, and your high performance strategies. Most importantly, it informs what you do as a coach, your focus, your scope of delivery. I wrote a chapter on this for the Routledge International Handbook of Talent ID in 2017, where I use athlete profiling, what it takes to win that profile, to then inform underpinning strategies. So if you're interested in that book chapter, I can certainly send it your way. So while the what it takes to win profiles are critically important, there's some key considerations that you need to take on. So with the athletes that you're supporting at the moment, a lot of them won't be fully matured biologically in terms of their physical maturation, but also psychologically as well. Also, they haven't had the right, that exposure and experience that will be coming, with competition. So you have to be mindful that you can't just overlay that adult profile and expect that, of your emerging athletes. Another point I will make, and some great research to show, that all profiles aren't the same. Even at the elite level, they can be compensatory in nature. Some athletes might be very high in technical to make up maybe for a little shortfall in the physical. So just be mindful that there isn't a gold standard and a cookie cutter approach to profiles. And then finally, just when you're doing profiling, understand where your athlete is in terms of their biological maturation. And understand if you've got late maturing athletes that might be very good in terms of skill and psychology, they might not be up there just yet in terms of their physical and physiological. So just be mindful of that, and obviously give late maturing athletes, who ultimately are a lot of our finest athletes, that affordance and that patience. Now, I want to draw on the great collaboration that I have done with Mick while he was at Triathlon New South Wales, and just show you how an understanding of the athlete profiling for triathlon then led to some other great work that Mick led. So it informed his F10 model and framework, which is fantastic. And his framework that he put together was so successful in really being clear on the expectations of all service providers supporting the athletes. It led to an effective MOU established and wonderful collaboration and coordination. It also informed an individual athlete development plan. So the profile informed the dimensions that were covered in that individual athlete development plan. The athlete profiling piece also informed some great education work that we did with athletes and parents. And I had the great honour to present with Brendan Sexton, Olympian for triathlon, and to use his learnings and marry it into the profiling, and then to give some great tips on self-regulation, for instance. And then finally, the profiling piece informed, our messaging to parents and how they can support their emerging athlete within their family. So the T3, let me go back to the T3 level of F10. So T3 is all about talent development. Now, we know it can be anywhere from 1 to 8 years that an athlete can be in the developmental phase. It's all about using a deliberate programming approach with a very athlete-centric philosophy. And it's all about holistic and integrated collaborative approach. At the top of it, the first thing that I've got there is the key thing in leadership of T3 is having an effective strategy and planning and management. It's having a talent development strategy, understanding who is doing what, how, and when. Also importantly, at the individual level, it's about having an individual development plan or athlete performance plan. It's about ongoing athlete monitoring of athletes while you've got that plan in place to inform adaptive individualised case management. Critically important to inform for a coach. It's about quality and progressive camps and the marrying of competition calendars, but also importantly, it's about sector collaboration, with SSOs, NSWIS, NSO for the betterment of that athlete. It's also about effective coaching practice, and I'll cover a few tips in a minute in regards to that, what you can consider. Your role is about equipping these pre-elite athletes, supporting them and really empowering them, getting them ready for their next progressive steps up the pathway and their experiences and opportunities. It's about providing facilitative and daily training environments, so safe, progressive, embracing environments and positive culture. It's about engaging in best practice athlete education, quality camps and progressive competition, dedicated educational initiatives for all support providers, including parents, and effective interdisciplinary case management. Similarly, for the T4 level, where the emerging athletes knocking on the door to transition up to the elite level, again, it's about having a plan and everyone being on that plan to support the transition of the athlete through a deliberate programming approach. It's about having a good understanding and learning from athletes that have gone through this before about the barriers and facilitators of transition. It's about dedicated transitional education for athletes. It's about effective and individualised case management. Most importantly, it's about exposure at key events in competition to support athletes and get them ready for the step up, and access to mentors. So as you can see, for the T3 and T4 level, there's a deliberate approach to this. And again, like the profile, it's very integrated and very coordinated to get the right outcome. So here are my tips for you guys as coaches, but I'm sure that you guys are all over this. But my first tip is train the brain. Now, I touched on this before, that we know from the research that I have done, the research globally, that the psychological skills and characteristics of an athlete, their competencies in those, is a recognised discriminator in elite level performance. It's really what is required to support the journey, which can have peaks and troughs in it. It can be arduous, but also to get the best performance at the very top. Also importantly, psychological skills such as self-regulation, smart goal setting and visualization helps learning, but it also helps with performance, but also outside of performance, self-management, confidence, resilience, and negotiating the transitions they've got in their pathway. It's a vital adjunct to physical and skill training. It's just as important, maybe even more important, as the physical body. It's critically important. It's another modality that you can use with an athlete if, for instance, at the moment they're not able to train and compete through this lockdown. It's something they can work on right now, or even if they're injured. With such great research has shown with visualization that there is a lack of detriment in performance, and it can help with skill acquisition and refinement. And these skills are really important too. They're transferable, and they're life skills as well. So touching on Lauren's great work, where she interviewed 14 of our finest Olympic and Paralympic champions, and this is her paper here, so I can certainly send that through to you. She found a commonality of these athletes were that they were phenomenal self-regulators. A lot of these athletes, it was very interesting, they didn't realise they were great self-regulators. Even Lauren herself didn't realise that. But they'd worked out this routine that you can see here, this cycle of self-regulation that really honed, their performance. So when I talk about self-regulation, it's a real complement of practical skills and strategies that facilitates learning, performance. The great thing about it from the research is that it does transfer into academic performance. So this is key skills for supporting academic prowess as well, and they're key life skills. So she found her athletes did this cyclical flow of self-regulation. So before an event, they were meticulous planners and prepared beautifully. They had a strategy, they set smart goals, they used visualization. So watching their performance in their mind's eye with different perspectives was incredibly important to their performance. During an event, they were phenomenal in terms of self-monitoring, their emotional regulation. After the event, they were very good to unpack their performance using different types of feedback. Did they meet their goals going into an event? And phenomenal in terms of the self-evaluation and talking to who they need to really evaluate their performance. And then finally, what was key was these athletes looked at the strengths and weaknesses in their performance and where they're at. And they were meticulous and very assertive in sourcing solutions to where they might have a gap and experimenting with potential solutions. So very assertive in speaking to who they needed to and really recalibrating and adapting their approach. And this was not just in performance, but even their life, the balance of their life with their performance. And she found, and we found through the research, that self-regulation is key, this cyclical approach to increasing self-belief, confidence, and effort in athletes. And it's all glued together with continual self-reflection. So I'll just touch on that now. So when I do a lot of education with coaches and with athletes and parents, I draw on the Gibbs reflective cycle. So a lot of you might be familiar with Gibbs reflective cycle that came out of the academic domain. But these are great line of questioning here in this flow that you can use to facilitate your athletes' self-reflective processes. You can practice this line of questioning to the point where the athlete does it themselves and it's habitual for the athlete. So you can ask them, what was the event? How did you feel before, during, and after the event? What worked well? What didn't work well? What did you learn importantly? What are some potential solutions that you need to experiment with? And what will you do in preparation for next time? So a simple line of questioning that I know Mick has used with his athletes and really effective in solidifying athletes' self-reflective processes. You can facilitate this by getting athletes to put it on the fridge or somewhere at home or at practice. I've seen it at the AIS at the back of the volleyball courts, or even your athletes having online or actual hard copy diaries are really effective as well. Now, to really hone an athlete's self-regulation, you need to have great facilitative learning environments. Now, I'm absolutely respectful and I really admire the great work that Kelly Cross does at Sydney FC. I've been really fortunate to observe what he does. And in my view, he's a phenomenal self-regulator and he's really great at facilitating athletes' self-regulation. So it's all about encouraging continual learning, problem-solving, innovation, doing it in a challenging but constructive way, promoting athlete autonomy and responsibility, their responsibility and self-management, having respect and gratitude, and being supportive and celebrating success together. It's about, really importantly, if you're promoting self-regulation and particularly self-reflection, to know when to minimise and draw back on your direct feedback to an athlete. So it's really about getting the athlete to think about their performance in training or competition. So how did they go? What do they need to work on? What were their strengths? What can they do next time? So that's a critical message for me, for coaches, is to know when to draw back in terms of your direct feedback. It's all about understanding too the power of observational learning as well. So this is where Kelly does a wonderful job. I've seen his training sessions where he has younger cohorts training with older cohorts and more skilled cohorts. So don't underplay the power of observational learning of your athletes as well through that vertical integration. Make sure you've got the IPP, and it's a shared IPP that the athlete's invested in and understands as well, and they take ownership of their goals. And then mentoring is critically important. And I know that Kelly has a mentoring program that goes so well with the coaches, with the athletes, and does that routinely, and it's incredibly effective. So as you can see, to facilitate an athlete's self-regulation, you need to be a good self-regulator yourself as a coach to facilitate the self-regulation. But these are all key skills for you as a coach as well. So I just wanted to make that point too. Now, just to touch on that, on the left there, from all the great work that Mick had led, and then the education work that we did in terms of self-regulation and putting templates together, that then fed into Mick's wonderful individual athlete development plans. And that's why it's so important to have an individual development plan, because it does promote buy-in and ownership. Everyone's on the same page. You have clear, realistic goals, timeframes, actions, and aligned support that is informed by your SMART goal setting philosophy. It also informs the coaching support that you provide and the support outside of your coaching from practitioners to support that athlete achieving that goal in a timely manner. It supports a periodic review of your athlete and how you will adapt your approach. And importantly, an individual development plan can link beautifully with an athlete monitoring system as well. So how are they tracking in all those dimensions? And that's some clear objective data there to support how they're going. Okay, in terms of smarter practice and integrating all of the skills, and this is touching on training competition, psychological skills and attributes, and sport-specific skills. My tips for you, and my background is skill acquisition and biomechanics and as a physiotherapist, I would say don't focus always on the quantity, focus on the quality of your practice. So what I mean by that is being more ecological in your practice. Now, I touched on that the best athletes have this synchrony, this automaticity, you know, their perceptual, their cognitive and their technical skills working beautifully. You think of the batsman that has milliseconds to adapt and react, you know, to a bowler coming in. Make sure you preserve those where you can in training. You know, if it's in game-based scenarios or you're using, you know, constraints-based learning, it's really important to preserve that perception-action coupling in your training, because that's what it's all about in competition. Make sure you bring in a lot of variability in your practice. So for a cricket batsman, it wouldn't be always in the nets. It might be out in the middle. They'd be facing maybe a left-handed bowler, a right-handed bowler, different types of bowling. So make sure you bring in lots of variability in the practice as well. Practice under fatigue and pressure, that's important because that's a realism of performing in competition. Make sure you embrace variable environmental conditions. You know, if it's safe to do so, and there is a little bit of, you know, spit and patter of rain, that's okay. You know, if it's a little bit windy, that's okay. That's a realism of competition. So embrace those environmental conditions for practice and incorporate creative play. You know, have a bit of fun with it, you know, with a game-based approach, because we know play is a critical vehicle for a lot of development of expertise and honing and bringing together all the skills. Make sure you're using competition to embed learning. So what you learn in practice, competition is a great opportunity to see, you know, has that worked, and really embedding that learning. And remember, importantly, that early maturers, so we spoke about late maturers before. On the flip side, you need to have a real emphasis and support of early maturers as well. So importantly, remember, don't always rely on the physical with them. Make sure that you're supporting them to get this holistic profile, and in particular, their psychological skills and their technical skills. If you support and advocate smarter practice, so more about the quality than the quantity, and considering these tips, it will really help to hone your athlete skill toolkit and facilitate their adaptability, versatility, and confidence in competition. In terms of maximising retention and progression, these are my tips. And it's drawing, again, you can see in the green, a lot of the athlete profile and probably the psychological as well. With retention progression, again, it's multidimensional. You know, it's about monitoring and managing training and competition load effectively. So knowing what competitions, how many teams they're in, across what representations, important. It's about neuromuscular conditioning. So not just about strength and conditioning, but posture and stability as well. It's about sound technique and embracing variability and adaptability in that technique as well. So not one gold standard technique. It's about the right playing surfaces, footwear and environment, adequate preparation, and there's also importantly effective recovery, sleep, nutrition, hydration, mood regulation. So as you can see, there's a lot to it. So I would advocate that you visualise, plan and review all of this through a shared, dedicated individual athlete performance plan. And make sure you clearly articulate the training, but importantly, the competition demands of your athletes to make sure that you can effectively manage it, that it is not too much, you know, for these young developing athletes and their bodies. Periodically review it and adapt the approach. And again, ensure you have ongoing athlete monitoring to check in and make sure these athletes are coping with the loading on a physical and mental side of things. A great resource is the AIS training load guidelines. So really impress on you to go to the AIS website, a wonderful resource informed by world-leading evidence. It has some great recommendations. And also the International Olympic Committee, go to their website. They've got a wonderful app called Get Set Train Smarter that has some really great exercises in there for injury prevention. So again, another really great resource to check out. In terms of sporting smarts and balance, and this is about what I touched on earlier, having knowledge, putting it into practice, being a good ambassador, having sport and life balance. Now, really pleased to say at the Office of Sport, we've revamped our pathways and development web pages. And if you go to there now, we have resources and tools for each of these stakeholder groups, including coaches, including parents, but importantly, emerging athletes. And in there, we've got an assortment of resources and documents and websites that you can go to, again, with a very holistic emphasis, and you can see them listed here. So really impress on you to go and check them out and give us some feedback on these resources. These resources we will change and evolve as we get more and more content. As I touched on, really critically important from Lauren's work, and this is from her second paper, that we have balance for our athletes. We know so many athletes that the T3 and T4 level are critical times where there's a lot of churn, a lot of dropout. And it can be not based on performance, but it can be on a lack of adequate balance, impact on well-being. So it's critically important that you are cognizant of the context of an athlete. Have they got support? Their well-being is critically important because you as a coach have a fundamental duty of care with these athletes. Within our web pages, I've put some infographics together. Now, this is an infographic based on the best practice principles of F10, but also these tips, and it's called Supporting Your Emerging Athletes. So tips for you as coaches, but also for parents. So this is something that you could already use with your parent groups to engage them and to get them to support you in what you're doing as a coach. All right, just to finally to finish, so thank you. That was a lot of content, but look, please go to our website. Very soon we'll be able to proudly present and share with you our Future Champions Action Plan, our first one from the strategy. But go there now and you'll see there's a coaches part of the website where we've got lots of great resources for you guys as coaches. I wanted to just impress on you this wonderful work that my colleague Simon Wanarski does at the Office of Sport. So he runs regular webinars with elite level coaches. I think, Mick, you've probably been interviewed too. On there, you can access these webinars and they're fantastic resources. So go after these this workshop, have a look at what we've got online. There you'll also see our F10 flyer that we've got at the moment, but as I touched on, coming very soon will be our system level considerations of F10, and then importantly, our considerations for coaches as well. Also at the moment, go to the website and you'll see our tips for the emerging athletes, the infographics, as well as other tools that you might be able to use with your athletes and parents straight away. And then lastly, we will keep you informed of the great sport pathways, partnerships and platform workshops that we will be running in line with our future champion strategy. Again, another wonderful opportunity to probably link online and again, listen to experts and practitioners in the field. So look, thank you so much for the opportunity. Always wonderful to connect with you. And I just commend you again on the wonderful work and enjoy the Olympics.
Thanks very much, Juanita. Lots of wonderful information and resources there. I'll hand straight over now to Mick Delamonte from Triathlon Australia. Thank you, Mick.
Thanks, Roger. Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to have a chat to you today. I'll probably touch on a few of the things Juanita was talking about earlier, and I want to thank Juanita as well, because over the last sort of 2 years in my role with Tri New South Wales, she's been a real pillar of strength for me and provided me with a lot of the guidance on what we've implemented over a period of time. So, and even before I worked one-on-one with Juanita, it was great to hear all her presentations and guidance and the F10 model that allowed us to get the journey where we've got to within triathlon. So it's just a bit over 5 years ago now, I started the role as pathway manager and coach education with Tri New South Wales, and it's an 18-hour-a-week job, so it was only part-time, and I did that as whilst coaching an elite space as well. But when we looked at what we inherited there, it was we had a lot of good things in place from a lot of good people that had been in that pathway role in the past. And we had relationships and MOUs with 3 RASI programs. So they were engaged, doing a great job. MOUs existed, and some good engagement with the local community. We had a growing youth and junior daily training environments. So our sport's relatively young in comparison to many others, and having, specific youth and junior training environments wasn't something that we had many years ago, but they were starting to grow as the sport started to get popular with the kids. We had a small group of really engaged coaches, and we had athletes that wanted to wear the New South Wales kit, and that was great because their aspirations were high and huge, and they loved wearing the blue, as we all do, and that was good. We realised that we weren't aligned to the F10 model, and we needed to be for things to work for us sustainably. We also had a large dropout of athletes post-school. So for us, the cliff on the sport was HSC. Once the kids left school, we lost a lot of talent from our sport, never to return. And there were a number of reasons for that, which I'll get into later. There was a lack of specific racing, which was a problem. We've got a lot of races around that cater for our kids within the country and indeed within the state, but nothing specific that really related to the demands of competition at an Olympic level. Junior racing was seen as the pinnacle of the sport, not the Olympics. And so we had coaches, parents and athletes preparing to do, all schools, national all schools and national series races. But being the champion at a youth or junior level was seen to be the be all and end all. And we didn't want it to be. We were very results focused. We did a lot of time trials, and we actually ranked our athletes nationally in swim and run times, believe it or not within races. And that was seen as a bit of a status. And ultimately, unsurprisingly, we had a high injury rate and burnout rate for our young athletes as well. So we created a strategy where we added an extra tier to our youth and junior programs within the pathways, and that was at an under 23 level. The average age of our Olympic gold medalists around the world is 26. We're a late specialisation sport. We're endurance-based. And adding an under 23 program was going to be important for us state-wise. We increased our footprint through our RASI network, and we've now got 7 regional Academy of Sport programs in place. We got key coach buy-in on the pathway philosophy, and that was incredibly important from my viewpoint. So unless we had our coaches understand what we're doing and the way we're doing it and why we're doing things, then we weren't going to get the athletes or the parents buying in. So coaches were number one in that regard. And to do that, I actually brought coaches into the planning process and the brainstorming process of that journey right through the 5 years that I was there within Tri New South Wales. And to this day, we've got, some of our earlier biggest critics, now our greatest advocates, because they were part of the journey as well. We added state level, what I refer to as Olympic style racing or draft legal style racing to our calendar. Short course, super sprints, mixed relays, which is an Olympic event for the first time in 2 weeks' time. So now we had a racing series that was like for like to our Olympic journey for the kids. Skill acquisition and process-based focus within the racing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Transparent and aligned policy and procedure and documentation. And Anita showed a little bit of that earlier. And importantly, being a second or a third tier sport, we don't have a lot of resources. Indeed, my role was part-time. So we had to engage initiatives put in initiatives that engaged our community, our existing clubs, our existing coaches, and brought them along the way. So it wasn't resource intensive for us. Okay, so we had our first tier of the pathway being for our high school aged kids from sort of year 7 to year 10. We didn't want sports specialisation. So one of our key messages was, we want you to do triathlon. We want you to fall in love with the sport, but we don't want you to be a triathlete. So go and do other sports, play your soccer, play your football, play your hockey, play your water polo, whatever it may be. Because getting back to Anita's point, we wanted athletes with really good motor skills and that physical literacy. And our sport is a lineal driven sport. We swim, ride and run in a straight line. So we're limited on what we can provide athletes in that regard. So by doing other sports as well, provides that opportunity to leverage off that skill set. At the 16 and 19 year level, we wanted them to start to specialise a little bit more, but also, involve themselves in other sports that were complementary, including surf life saving, swimming, cycling, and running. Cross country, BMX, mountain biking, whatever it may be, and then importantly the under 23 level, which we brought our athletes into, which was more about evolving to daily training and daily performance environments around the country, getting international exposure and starting to put themselves in an environment where they could commit to the sport now that they've been confirmed as talented athletes. From an F10 model perspective, our F10 model basically starts at the foundational level. So our regional academy sport and roster program started at that F3 level. And we realised that our emerging talent and under 23s went through the first 3 stages of the talent model. And we felt that T4 was the time where they transitioned out of a state level model to a national level model. And that's worked really well for us. So some of the benefits we created was an absolute team buy-in at all facets of the sport. So our stakeholders, importantly, athletes, coaches, parents, and clubs. So we did a lot of parent engagement when we making change within the program. So we had the coaches on first. We communicated to the athletes what and why we were doing things, but importantly, we spoke to our parents. We educated them on our program, what we were trying to achieve and what was in the best interests of the athletes. We included state racing opportunities. Now that racing environment that we've got now, a series that we have around the state, is quite unique in that whilst we reward athletes in their genders and age groups, they all race together in heats and finals. So each race has at least 2, maybe up to 7 races over the course of a weekend. They're super short. And part of that is giving the athletes the opportunity to race, reflect, go back and race again and reflect. So mistakes they make and things they learn from a tactical and technical perspective, they can then reflect on that and then go and try to execute on in their next event that they do. So we've literally got boys racing against girls. We've got 13, 14-year-old kids racing with and against Olympians in some cases. But we've done that in a heats and finals sort of format. So our finals are graded not by age and not by gender, but by ability levels at that particular point in time. So again, it's not chronological in relation to age reward. We've had some of our girls race with our senior boys, and we've had some boys that are 16 and 17, but very late developers. So they've got a high level of skill, but they don't have the diesel engine or the actual strength yet to be able to compete against boys their own age. But they are competing with boys and quite competitive that are a little younger, and indeed competing with the older girls. So we've been able to create an ability where there's critical mass, rather than our late developers being left out in the cold, and that's proved highly successful for us, and a lot of fun for the kids. Ultimately, we're now getting results at the under 23 elite level and above from athletes within our pathway. They're actually competing and quite often beating athletes at our national level pathway. So this has been a great success for us, and we're seeing the reward where we want it, and we're seeing results at the under 23 level and above. We're less worried about results at youth and junior level. So from a legacy perspective, what have we seen there? We've got a collaborative group of coaches. So rather than coaches working against each other and looking at each other and their relative programs as being competition, they're supporting each other. So we've got some programs where we've got, we might have one girl amongst 8 to 10 boys in a program. That coach is working with another coach that has a complete opposite dynamic, where they've got a lot of girls and less boys, and they're actually swapping athletes from across weekends, or indeed coming together and amalgamating squads for critical mass in order to do some work together as well. So some of our athletes, our programs that are out in Western Sydney or indeed Western region, are coming to the coastal coaching groups to work on open water swimming, and vice versa. Those city groups are going out of the country to do some bike sessions as well to get off the busy city roads. So that collaboration's been really valuable for the athletes. Parents understanding what and why. So one thing we know as coaches, that we're not at the dinner table and we can't control the dinner table conversations, but one thing I've certainly learned is that we can influence the dinner table conversation if parents understand. They don't have to agree, but at least they understand the methodology behind what we're doing and why we're doing it. Providing racing opportunities for the athletes to learn. Not every race is the Olympic Games, and that's important for coaches to understand and for athletes to understand, that every race is an opportunity to reflect, learn, and get better the next race that they have in place, and quite often they're more valuable than the training opportunity itself. So what's been great is that our senior athletes have given back. We've put our under 23s through coaching courses, and they've become great drivers and advocates for our culture. And indeed, at the Regional Academy Games that was held in April at the Central Coast, we had 5 or 6 of those athletes along on those camp environments with our 12, 13 and 14-year-old kids, coaching and mentoring those athletes. And they have a far greater impact than old blokes like myself trying to speak to these kids, these young athletes that are in their late teens and early 20s, are really, really valuable advocates and mentors and role models for these young kids coming through. The suite of aligned policies and procedures, and I use the word aligned because we are aligned to our national pathway framework that's in place, and every decision that we've made has been aligned throughout the journey. We've produced more athletes and more athletes that have got better quality, and importantly, we've provided fun, safe, supportive environments for our kids. And I think, it's really important that we keep it real and make sure that these kids are loving what they're doing, because I don't know a world champion that doesn't love the sport. So some take-home messages for me. The athletes need to enjoy what they do. So I think from a coach's perspective, when you're designing training sessions, don't think just about the exercise prescription component of what you're doing. Yes, we need our kids conditioned. And I think it was referred to earlier about load management. Load management's key to think about, but make sure you've got some skill objectives within each session. It's important that that's involved with a game sense sort of focus, so these kids can love what they do. They've got to learn from the journey. So being very intrinsically motivated, I see that as being, the pathway to a successful athlete. If it's a focus on one key race or one magic training session, or the medal or something extrinsic, to me that's short term. If you've got an intrinsically motivated athlete that understands the pitfalls of a long-term journey, that's an important skill for life, not just indeed for sport. So that's important. We've mentioned racing and reflecting. And certainly for the youth and juniors, racing is about the opportunity to learn, reflect, and then execute better going forward, and taking the link between what they're doing in the race, bringing it back to the training environment, and then what they learn in the training environment, trying to execute that on race day. It's really critical. Consistency is key. I think some athletes think that, one key or magic training session or 2 or 3 week blocks is going to make them. It doesn't, certainly within our sport. Good, consistent, sensible training loads that are monitored by a coach is critical to ensure that they've got more opportunities to train appropriately, which allows them then to race in what is a healthy and injury-free body. And that's how they will progress long term. Getting the athlete to listen to their body. So give them an opportunity to understand their body and what works for them and what doesn't. So that guided discovery model within your coaching will really help them understand what works and what doesn't, and allow them to challenge themselves. I think that's really important. So being comfortable with uncomfortable sometimes is critical for them to be well prepared for the demands of competition. As a coach, building robustness is probably the key thing from my viewpoint. Plenty of athletes that I've either inherited or seen that have low energy availability. They don't eat properly. They don't drink properly. They certainly don't rest properly. They see their athletic career to be one of a priority over school, certainly in our model, school first. And parents are never going to get an argument from us in the pathway about school being first. And indeed, we recognise that athletes going through that critical period of HSC, but even big times of exams and assignments and so forth is really important to lay off the training a little bit, be a little less structured potentially, just in order to maintain that school priority. But being, physically robust, strong, try to alleviate as much stress as they can. That all helps with being, injury-free and illness-free. Have a real skill focus in every session that they do, even the ones that are exercise prescription-based. Race to learn, not always to win. They will learn to win, but they've got to learn that it's all about the process in the first instance. life lessons in sport. So we've done a lot of camps, a lot of races where, we've got to learn tolerance with living with each other. We've got to learn how to cook and clean, be patient, be on time, personal hygiene, importantly, respect for themselves, for each other, for other coaches, good sportsmanship, those sorts of things. To me, they're no-brainers. They're life lessons, but geez, we had no better example than Ashley Barty over the last 24 hours of what a wonderful, refreshing sports advocate she is for our country. Grow as a coach, and I think the big message for me to you as coaches is never stop learning, never stop exploring, inside and outside of your sport. I think that's incredibly important. And utilize the pathway. So utilize resources and the systems that exist within state sporting organisations. There's a really big emphasis to try to develop coaches, and trying to make sure that you've got opportunities within the pathway. And I think that's important from my viewpoint. I've gone through this quite quickly, but I'm really aware of time. So I'll finish it there, but I'm happy to take questions later, and indeed send through some resources and speak to coaches if they wish at a later time.
Thank you, Mick. That was absolutely fantastic. And those take-home messages are relevant no matter what the sport the coaches are involved in. So we really do appreciate that. And any questions for any of the presenters, put them in the chat and we'll get them answered. I can let you know that we are going to run over time. Because I've given Stephen an hour, so be prepared for that. So with great deal of pleasure, I hand over to Dr. Stephen Bird. So thank you, Stephen.
Okay, thank you for that, Roger. Appreciate that. So my name is Associate Professor Stephen Bird. I'd like to welcome you to this particular session, which is entitled Psychological Strategies for Success in Youth Athletes Today. What we'll do before we get going is just have a quick breakdown of the session. So in this session, we're going to unpack one specific principle from behavioural psychology and explore 4 specific ways you can assist your athletes in what we're going to call today quieting the inner critic. That will be the theme of this particular presentation. I want to thank the committee though, firstly. So Roger for the invitation and Michael for setting everything up. I also want to thank the co-speakers, so Anita and Mick for the insightful sessions. Anita, a great slide on train the brain, and Mick, just then your take-home points were most pertinent to what we're doing. But we've been in the chair for a bit, so before we get going, I just want to make sure that everyone's still with us and you're still online. So in your reactions button down the bottom, just give me a quick thumbs up so I can see everyone's still alive out there in the online world. Once you've done that, thanks Anita, appreciate that. See all these thumbs up coming in thick and fast. Great work. Excellent. Righto. Let's move along. So what I'd like to do though is I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I extend respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the audience with us today. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about 4 key strategies, and we're going to explore these strategies in relation to the practical use, such as goal setting, visualization, anchoring, and mindfulness. So let's get started. But before we do get started though, it's really important for us to take a time to reflect and understand the context, because the context in which we utilize these strategies is going to differ from sport to sport and from athlete to athlete, because context matters. Now, context today will provide examples to you from 2 sporting environments. And this will allow us to reflect on some of the unique circumstances we face as coaches today working with youth athletes of today. So the 2 contexts that we're going to touch on, one is going to be from our recently published book, and we're going to outline some concepts from When Winning Matters, a book that I've recently co-authored with international basketball coach, Rob Beveridge. Now, specifically within the book, our goal is to highlight some of the areas from the game plan, touch briefly on culture, 1%ers that count. That is where we're going to look at specifically in relation to some of the psychological strategies to help us quiet the inner critic. Secondly, we're going to look at the context from our work within the Western Region Academy of Sport. I was fortunate enough to work at RAS for a period of over 10 years as the Director of Strength and Conditioning. Now, those that may be unfamiliar with RAS, is what's unique about the academy settings is RAS occupies a geographical location of more than 91,000 square kilometres, services around 125 pre-elite youth athletes at various stages within their athlete development journey. So we're going to use these two contexts to provide some background as we explore psychological strategies for youth athletes today. Now, when we look at that, what we do know from the literature is that in youth athletes, the perceptions of groupness, so this degree to which a collection of individuals is perceived to be a group, has been found to improve social identity within youth athletes, the feeling of belonging and being within a group itself. Now, youth athletes who felt they were members of a team exhibited a high degree of groupness, were more likely to perceive close ties, derive positive emotions, and indicate their importance. So here, we're now trying to link this area of perception is reality. So these athletes perceive this level of groupness and they feel like they're part of a community. But my question to you today really revolves around that perception is sometimes not always reality. Being comfortable in uncomfortable situations is something that athletes, especially youth athletes, are exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So in this particular example, my question to you is perception of being in my kayak, having a nice row out in the sea, actually my reality when you look at what is actually behind you? So in this instance, a great white surfacing behind researcher Troy Snow's kayak in South Africa in 2003. I certainly know for myself, if that was the position that I was confronted with, I would have a level of stress that would be increasing stroke by stroke as I made my way towards the shore. Now, with stress, there are a lot of definitions around what actually is stress. But to put it simply, stress can be defined as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain. And we see this a lot, particularly within emerging athletes in their athletic development transition. I mentioned briefly earlier about my time at the Western Region Academy of Sport. And one of the papers where I published out of RAS was a wellness monitoring tool for youth athletes. And it was very interesting to see in Anita's presentation the importance of the FTEM system approach, which was outlined. And this is a very important consideration, especially within the well-being of youth athletes. Because if we have a look at some of the stresses faced by youth athletes, these include training, competition, travel, and obviously study, all of which may have an accumulative impact on the youth athlete's stress fatigue state. Now, in surveying the athletes across a 10-year period at the academy, they reported a significant stressor was identified as parental. So along with their training, their competition, their travel, and their study schedule, there was a significant stressor, that being the parents. So we need to look at how important some of the psychological tools they have aid them in trying to reduce this noise and further quiet the inner critic. Now, surprisingly, with these pre-elite youth athletes, after identifying the stresses, we asked them, as an athlete, what is your most important attribute? Now, it may be to your surprise that less than 10% of pre-elite youth athletes identified mindset or their psychological makeup as an important attribute for their level of performance. This is extremely surprising, considering that 50 to 90% of successful athletic performance and victory against an opponent of equal physical abilities can depend on mental skills and psychological preparation. Which is a great segue when we look at and start to introduce this concept of mentality. So mentality, we're talking about your mentality will determine more than your skills. Now, this is a particular quote from a recent podcast by King and the Coach that featured the current 3-time NBL champion and 3-time NBL MVP player, Bryce Cotton. And of this mentality that he talks about, there is one key attribute which he felt defines athletes' mentality. And that key attribute is overall their behaviour. Now, with that in mind, behaviour is key to putting you in a position to be able to achieve what is required at one point in time. We're just going to take a moment and watch a very short clip on behaviour in elite sporting settings.
We gotta talk. We gotta talk. Write stuff, Dom. Hey, watch it, Dom. Watch it. Over talk, man. Let's over talk. Over talk. I'm low, man. I'm low, man. We got tags. Tag out. I'm on nail. My ball. I'm in. Hey, I got your help. I'm here. I'm low. In the gap. My ball. Hey, ball. I'm in the gap. Hey, I'm low, man. You good, Kimber? Go. Hey, oh, no. That's the talk, though. At that kick, yo, I'm going. Way to talk, fellas.
So as you can see there, the communication aspect is essential with any athlete and coach. But what we talk about now as we move forward from mentality and behaviour, quite often many organisations talk about team values. Now, in sports elite, we know that in order to make team values meaningful, they must be linked to behaviours. And these are what we call our non-negotiables. These are our conscious commitments that the members make. So it's not just about having a team value, but it's anchoring and attaching this to something tangible. Now, in this particular example, we're going to use commitment as the team value. And for commitment, we're going to look at aligning 4 particular behaviours that link to that particular team value. So in this instance, the non-negotiable behaviours are 1, be on time and ready to train and play every time. So a level of professionalism. 2, put in extra work after training. So for commitment, we have a level of deliberate practice. 3, preparation and recovery for training and games. So looking after the physical and mental preparation. And finally, number 4, hold each other accountable. So there's no excuses. So in this example, while we talk about a team value being commitment, we've now aligned specific non-negotiable behaviours that attach the players to their conscious commitments. And in this case, that is to enforce the behaviours that will allow them to exhibit this commitment value. Now, along those lines, I'd like to introduce you to a guy called Inky Johnson. Inky Johnson is quoted as saying we should look at the process, i.e. the behaviours, not the product that is the result. And this all starts with commitment, i.e. the value we just looked at previously. Now, what Inky goes on to talk about is the fact that if we look at the psychological resilience pyramid, commitment leads to accountability, and accountability requires discipline. Discipline leads to execution, and it's execution that will lead to results. That is process over product. Achieving results is no mistake. It is a consequence of commitment, and that is why commitment is the foundation of the psychological resilience pyramid. Now, when we have a look at putting that all together from our mentality through our behaviours, through communication, through your team values. We're just going to take a quick break and have a look at one more clip that puts that all together for us. Here is the perfect example of process over product. Two team members working at once, 1.2 second pit stop, all working on at the same point, doing their job, knowing their role. That then leads us through to, in working with thousands of athletes over the time, we've been able to gather feedback regarding what they consider to be the 1%ers that they feel most impactful on their performance for them. Now, ironically, when we did a thematic reduction of the 7 key 1%ers that were identified, the top 5 were psychological related strategies. So what we're going to look at now is how we can practically apply these top 4 strategies to help us quiet the inner critic within our youth athletes. The first one, goal setting. Now, I know Anita had mentioned this earlier on in the piece, and this is one of the first points of contact when we have with our athletes around have they actually set formalized goals. Now, this is really important because what we know is that there appears to be a lack of actionable steps that allow athletes to go through the process for goal achievement. Now, keep in mind, as humans, we process visually approximately 60,000 times faster than have an image based on looking at a particular verbal feedback. So if I can see something, it's going to be processed 60,000 times faster than any other means. So the importance of step number 1, which is writing down your goals, means that you can visually see them. This is an important point because when we see something, it affects how we act. And that goes back to our characteristics of behavior earlier on. So the first point for our athletes is have them write down their goals. But that's not where the process stops. The second thing we need to do is after having our goals written down, and by doing that alone, we're 43% more likely to achieve them. But the second step in that is I'm going to write them down, and then I'm going to write some actionable items or actionable outcomes that I want to, that are going to take me to help me achieve that goal. So I'll write down some actionable steps. And what are my commitments to achieving that goal? Now I've gone from 43% more likely to achieve the goal to about 62% more likely. Now, when we go from there, the third step is after I've had my athletes write down their goals and then they've completed some actionable steps, our next thing is to share them. So I'm going to get them to increase the level of accountability by now handing that over to somebody else. So now they're going to be accountable to another player or a coach. By doing that, I've now increased my likelihood of achieving those written down goals from 62% to 76%. So as you can see, it's one thing just to say to goals, how do you have goals? But they need to be written down. We need to write actionable steps to achieve them. And then we need to share them with somebody in order to create some accountability. So the effectiveness of actionable steps related to goal setting, writing down the goals is the first point. Actionable steps for commitments is the second point. And accountability with sharing are keys to the goal setting process. The next area we're going to touch on is that of visualization. And I'll give you a basketball example. So in this particular example, we're looking at the 2 NBA basketballers with the highest career free throw shooting percentages of all time. So Steph Curry and Steve Nash. And they've both utilised visualisation as a key component of mental rehearsal as part of their free throw shooting routine. So if you look at Curry at 90.4%, so that's 2,347 out of 2,500 shots, and Steve Nash at 90.43%, so 3,060 out of 3,384 shots. The value of visualization is an area that can produce improvements in long-term performance over time. The other area to that is we need to look at some of the reasons surrounding the practice of visualization. Now, through the use of visualization strategies, we've seen reductions in youth athlete performance anxiety by just having a few key steps that they can follow. And these can be things such as simply, learning to reproduce the skills more quickly, accurately, and smoothly. I can manage our expectations and limitations more effectively. Obviously, avoid repeating the same mistakes repeatedly. Maintain a presence of mind in high-pressure situations. Experience greater commitment and motivation to the task at hand. And ultimately, experience more confidence in outright abilities. So there are several reasons to look at engaging athletes within the practice of visualization. Now, we've utilised a visualization strategy plan with athletes from pre-elite youth all the way up through to senior. And we offer them a 7 steps to success process. And the idea being that the activity will help the athlete build their own visualization plan. And then we look at having the athlete implement this visualization plan over the next 28-day period, where they can start to employ visualization, which becomes a part of their everyday practice. Feedback from the athletes that had utilised the strategy have all reported significant reductions in performance anxiety traits. Okay, the next part we're going to look at is that of anchoring. Now, this is something that's not new. It's been used for some period of time. Most recently, it was in the news with St Kilda Football Club, where they spoke about this goal of the move within their performance department to look at above the shoulders strategy. So this was the connection between mindfulness and performance. The clip you're seeing here was part of their deep nasal breathing that they employed at quarter time periods within games. The idea was to reduce the noise, allow yourself a moment to reflect, bring yourself back to the here and now, becoming centered or anchored to the moment. Now, as I mentioned, anchoring is nothing new. It's heavily grounded in the area of aviation. Now, what they showed was they looked at surveying a series of pilots who had experienced a catastrophic event, i.e. they're flying the plane and they've had an event where it's resulted in the plane going into a crashing situation. What they're able to do was to have a look at first response of the pilot. And the athletes the pilots they surveyed all said for that one moment in time, they utilised a strategy called a fixated gaze, where they looked and viewed the operations manual. They didn't touch it. They didn't pick it up. They just took a moment and looked at it. That was their anchor. They've read that manual 1,000 times. It's like the free throw example we showed you earlier. Those athletes will have taken 1,000 free throws. But the one shot in basketball, which is the only shot that is uncontested, is in some instances the hardest shot to make with some of these athletes. So for the pilots, they took a fixated gaze, brought them back to the here and now. Then they were able to go through the routine of doing what needed to be done to remain in control of the task at hand. We've mentioned along with this area of fixated gazing. Our whole area of anchoring techniques is that to practice being present at the same time. Now, we know it's hard to be locked in for athletes in a game situation for the entirety of the game. There's going to be ebbs and flows as they compete. What we would like to do is have them go through and utilise a routine that they feel comfortable with. And we've utilised this routine extensively in basketball, as when that players would go to the free throw line, they would close their eyes briefly. They would take 2 very purposeful, deep nasal breaths. The idea of trying to clear the mind and reduce their heart rate. They would open their eyes to bring them back to the present, to the here and now. They would then take a fixated gaze at a particular part. An example we will use would be the top right-hand corner of the backboard. So that they would achieve this quiet eye fixation for a moment, allowing them to reaffirm what they're going to do. Then they would go into whatever their pre-shooting routine would be. Now, as you can see there, this whole process takes no more than approximately 5 seconds. We've also used this in relation to when we have athletes in new environments to try and improve situational awareness. So once again, a basketball example would be is if we go to a new venue, we would have the athletes walk on court, they would find a spot, they would go through this particular routine, but the reaffirmation would be the skill they're trying to perform, getting to their spot for their shot, locking down a player in defense. And we would go through that positive reaffirmation within the period they had their eyes closed. We always finish off then with 2 claps to bring them back to the here and now, 2 toe taps on the court with their feet to reconnect to the environment, and then we would move on to another spot on court. Right, the next one to move on to is that of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has become quite a key area that has been discussed in the media and the literature increasingly over the last few months. Now, if we look at mindfulness, we know that mindfulness will help to develop clarity, and which helps improve a team's ability to execute, its ability to change direction confidently in the present moment. It allows players to control emotional reactivity, and that is extremely important under the game-type pressures of the bright lights. Now, I did mention earlier that we had used some anchoring techniques for free throw shooting within professional basketballers. And I just want to do that for a second and talk about a particular single subject case study with a particular player in the National Basketball League. Now, this player was a 2-time grand final MVP. Now, prior to implementing their anchoring techniques and us challenging the player to look at situational reframing, their free throw shooting percentage was at a 54%. After introducing these techniques, and a lot of credit must go to the player who ensured that they fully engaged in the process. And sometimes the process is not necessarily a good fit for every single player. But for this particular player, they immerse themselves in the process around anchoring techniques. And the result of that was a 37% increase in free throw shooting percentage. So now add that 37 to 54, you're now talking about a free throw shooting percentage of 91%. Now also, mindfulness is a key component of emotional wellness. And that's really a person's ability to cope with daily circumstances and the changes in those daily circumstances. It allows them to deal with personal feelings in a positive, optimistic, and constructive manner. Now, we've successfully used an app called Smiling Mind. So I strongly recommend you jump on there and have a look at that in your own time. There are multiple out there. We have no association with the Smiling Mind company. However, the athletes that we have utilised with this particular app, which does revolve around a series of mindfulness, meditation, reaffirmation strategies through audio, the feedback from the playing group has always been extremely positive, to the point where we use this as one of our primary strategies when we know we have lead-ups coming into extensive periods of time where there may be increases in stress. So I'd certainly recommend looking at the Smiling Mind. Now, the other area around mindfulness which we've used and had a lot of success with our pre-elite youth athletes, is to really help this situation of sleep. Because you can look at a significant amount of literature at the moment will show you the interactions between sleep quality, sleep quantity, and the impact on injury. So quite often our mindfulness work with some of our athletes will be one part of what we would establish for their pre-sleep routine. Now, what we do know is youth athletes that have said to us they have issues sleeping, quite often it'll be, okay, it's time to go to bed, so now I'm just going to hop into bed. However, that hasn't established a pre-sleep routine that is going to allow them to have the most conducive sleep environment. So for us, we would look at utilising mindfulness as part of our pre-sleep routine. Now, how are we going to apply mindfulness in the situation for particular athletes? There are really 4 key areas that we use for mindfulness, and that is, how can I achieve or help the athlete achieve a calmness in which they're in the moment, they're on their game. This is complete situational awareness, situational control to achieve what we'd like to be performance flow. Now, when you think of performance flow and you think of athletes, the best of the best, the greatest of all time, so the GOATs within the different fields or the different sports, the one common trait that they display during competition is this luxury of time. They appear to be in slow motion. And a lot of that deals with their ability to control their negative reactions and negative responsiveness to different situations. So the 4 things we look at with our athletes: 1, our goal is to achieve performance flow. So this is clarity, situational awareness, which will help us achieve accurate execution. We want the athlete to be clear and we want them to be able to adapt and overcome in the environmental situation that is sport. In order to do that, we really get them to focus on reducing their attentional field. So we want to control that attentional field, filter out the noise. And this will allow them to control their emotional reactiveness. Because it's these emotional reactions we find players get lost in the noise of those emotions. So our primary goal is to help the athlete manage that emotional reactiveness. And this can help us to lead to what we would call blue flow state, or this performance flow state. And then when we get there, that's when the athletes tell us that they achieve this deep calmness and flow. And a repeated theme from that is they have this level of high clarity on task and this increased situational awareness. So what we try and achieve with the athletes along the goal of mindfulness is to get them to the point where we can reduce the noise. That is our primary target. And there are ways we look at doing that through performance flow, attentional field, reducing emotional reactiveness, and then putting them in a blue mind state for high clarity on task. So to put that all together, what practically can we take away for you guys to be able to work with your athletes in one of these particular areas? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, our primary goal was to provide you with some strategies where we can quiet the inner critic. Because we know this active judgment ignites this critic, especially in pre-elite youth athletes. And this leads to these emotional reactions. So the strategies we've gone over today are to help athletes avoid attaching these emotions related to the overall performance outcome. So we want to take them back to the process, not the product. This whole area allows them to control these negative emotional reactions. Being relaxed not only allows the player to play better, or the athlete to play better, but allows them to feel better. Now, for us, it's really about avoiding attaching these emotional reactions, having the athletes maintain a relaxed focus. And we've discussed 4 particular ways we can use different psychological strategies to assist us in quieting the inner critic. Now, especially during intensified training and competition periods, we know that this inner critic can creep up across a multitude of athletes, especially in significant camp considerations. So I just want you to consider what we discussed so far as we watch one last clip from Basketball New Zealand with their women's senior team at training camp in preparation for the Asia Cup.
There's full empathy for the fact that we're 80% of the way through the camp, 2-a-days, tired bodies. So what this replicates is end of a tournament and how we feel, and everyone's tired, but the team that executes wins. The team that gives way to fatigue is not going to.
Now, the reason for us showing you that particular clip, we had 4 of those particular athletes were youth athletes, their first time being part of the National Senior Women's Camp. So their transition through the junior pathway into the senior pathway, and we employed all 4 strategies with those particular athletes during that particular camp. So our key points, we've addressed several key areas related to psychological strategies for success in youth athletes, particularly talking around what strategies can we utilise in order to quiet the inner critic. So reflecting in the context of your environment, the athletes that you work with, I want you to consider what would you use as your big rocks that you can implement to assist youth athletes in your particular program. And once again, those big rocks that we've touched on today revolved around goal setting, visualization, anchoring, and mindfulness. So I just want to thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions as we need to moving forward.